Yes, I've started, but there are no students yet. There's no viewers yet. I'm sending you the link entered through your PC. Okay. I hope everyone can hear me. So our today's session would be on the CLRI Part C. It's actually hard to understand if anyone is hearing me, but all I can see is the viewers. Anyways, if you have entered through the first link, you would notice on the right, there is this column that would allow you to ask questions. If you have entered through the first link, if you've entered through the second link, which is the YouTube channel, I do not think they have that option. ঠিক আছে. Anyways, to start, okay. So we are going to start our sessions with the, let me just share this with you. Okay, slideshow. from beginning. Okay, this is very weird. Anyways, ঠিক আছে. So, Antisocial Behavior, Crime and Policing Act 2014. That's what we're going to do today. তো আমরা as we understand যে আমাদের যখন CLRI part C টা আপনাদের exams এ আসবে তখন exams এ first thing that you'd be required to do is that you'd be provided with certain sections. সেই sections গুলো আপনাকে certain situations এ apply করে সেই situation এর answer টা কি হবে, you find the answer to that and then you write down the answer. So here what I have done is, along with my friend, that we take an hypothetical situation and we break it down, applying this act to the situation to find the answer. ঠিক আছে, moving on. Scenario. This is a locality in England. There are house A, B, C, D and D. And amongst all of that, there is Mr. X living in the middle. And he is the nuisance maker, the problem person. So we understand যে দেখা যাচ্ছে যেমন Mr. X, what happens is he's a student, retired, no, he's a student, university, first year, has parties over at his place, loud music plays throughout the night. He has a barbecue, due to which you find smoke and smell all over the place, as you can see here. And then he also has a little dog, a little problematic pet that barks all night long whenever they are not having a party. So Mr. X creating three kinds of problem. Number one, he plays loud music. Number two, he creates smoke, steam, which escapes and affects the person around him. Number three, he has a problematic pet, a dog that barks all night long. Solution to the problems, right? In order to find the solution to this problem, in our situation, we're going to use the Anti-Social Behavior, Crime and Policing Act, specifically a few sections. First of all, we're going to apply a community protection notice, the regulations of community protection notice, and we're going to give Mr. X a community protection notice in order to deter him or stop him from doing whatever he's doing. ঠিক আছে? So first of all, you have to understand that giving a community protection notice does not discharge the council from its duty to issue an abatement notice when the behavior constitutes a statutory nuisance under Environment Protection Act. So if the act done by Mr. X is creating a nuisance, it should be noted that situations under nuisance can be handled and acted upon as a nuisance. Just because আপনি community protection notice issue করছেন তার মানে এই না যে আপনি nuisance under steps নিতে পারছেন না বা এটা যে exclusive to one another. That is not the case. So even if you apply a community protection notice to this situation, for example, এখানে যে Mr. X এর বাসা থেকে smoke and smells বের হচ্ছে right here, this can also amount to nuisance, and if it does amount to nuisance, you can still find him liable for nuisance. Moving on, in the situation, there are a few requirements that need to be fulfilled. First of all, the first requirement is under section 43 subsection 1. To issue a community protection notice, it must be done by an authorized person. And this authorized person can give it to any individual jar boyesh 16 er beshi, or maybe it is an organization or a body, and it must be seen when issuing this notice to this person or this body, it must be satisfied that they are doing this act on reasonable grounds. তার কিছু reasonable grounds satisfy করতে হবে। এই reasonable grounds গুলো যদি fulfilled হয়, satisfied হয়, তাহলেই they will have the option of giving this community protection notice. What is a community protection notice? Plain and simple, it is like a warning. Once this warning is issued, if the person does not follow the warning, it amounts to a punishment. It amounts to a criminal offense, specifically speaking, as a result of which you would be punished. So grounds of reasonableness, let's look into that. First of all, the conduct of the individual or body in having a detrimental effect. First point key, there has to be a detrimental effect. The conduct must cause a detrimental effect. So for example, there's this dog that persistently barks all night. The situation, this dog, due to the barking, because the dog keeps barking the whole night. The loud music, তারা প্রপারলি তাদের পড়াশোনা সন্ধ্যার সময় পড়তে বসলে তাদের ছেলেমেয়েরা মনোযোগ দিয়ে পড়তে পারছে না because there's this loud music all the time. And then the smell-এর কারণে থাকতে পারছে না, ঘরের বাইরে বের হতে পারছে না because of the smell produced by Mr. X, which affects all the ABCD households. Hence আমরা দেখলাম যে আমাদের সিচুয়েশনে আমার detrimental effect আছে. Good. Second situation, it has to be a persistent and continuing nature. So এটা বুঝতে হবে আমাদেরকে যে it cannot be a one-off thing. যে এটা যদি just একবার ঘটে, এমন একটা situation that just happened once, that is not persistent and continuing. The problem at hand has to continue for a while for it to have the effect, or for it to give rise to the circumstances in which we can issue a community protection notice. Thirdly, it has to affect the quality of life of those in the locality. So for example, আমরা যেমন দেখলাম আমাদের সিচুয়েশনটা এই যে household A, B, C, D and E, these are the ones that are being affected. So for example, this is placed in Dhanmondi. Someone from Mirpur cannot complain against Mr. X because he plays loud music all the time, because someone in Mirpur who lives there is not affected by what's being done in Dhanmondi, so that does not apply. So it has to be someone that's in the locality. It has to affect the quality of life of people in the locality. And lastly, the conduct done by the person has to be unreasonable. So for example, in our situation, if someone plays loud music 7 days a week, all night long, and goes to sleep at 5 in the morning, so what happens is neighbors at 5 in the morning to go to office, because they have been awake the whole night. So clearly, if someone plays music all day, every day, that is unreasonable. Moving on. Just a second before all of that. Good. Okay. So I see there are a number of viewers here. Good. Okay. Sorry, I'll go back to the share now. Yes. So, yeah. Next, so what is the community protection notice? Section 43, subsection 3 provides a community protection notice is a notice that imposes any of the following requirements on an individual or body. So plain and simple, it's a notice, it's a paper in which it would tell a person, for example, Mr. X, I am issuing this notice to you. By I mean the authorized person that we discussed before. I, the authorized person, am issuing this notice to you, and I require you to, number one, maybe, to stop doing something specific. So for example, the notice might have, the content might say, Mr. X, stop playing loud music all day, every day. Or to do a specific thing, Mr. X, stop your dog from barking all night long. So I'm asking him to do a specified thing. Or maybe to take reasonable steps to achieve a specified result. For example, আমার ঘর থেকে smoke release হয়ে পাশের বাসায় যাচ্ছে, আমাকে বলতে পারেন যে মিস্টার এক্স টেক রিজনেবল স্টেপস যাতে এই স্মোকটা এসকেপ করে আমার বাসায় না আসে। সো ফর এক্সাম্পল, হ্যাভ এন এক্সস্ট ফ্যান, ক্রিয়েট এন চিমনি, মেক দিস থিংস সো দ্যাট আমাদের প্রবলেম না হয়। So these are a few things that would be, these are a few duties that would be imposed by the community protection notice. That is section 43 subsection 3. Next, we must consider a few little points that are very important. Number one, it has to be reasonable. Section 43 subsection 4 এর মধ্যে বলা আছে যে আপনারা যে রিকোয়ারমেন্ট ইম্পোজ করছেন, the thing you're telling Mr. X to do something, it has to be reasonable to impose this duty upon him. ঠিক আছে? So for example, একটা সিচুয়েশন, Mr. X এখন ধরেন for example the dog is barking for a long while now, all night, every night. আপনি reasonably তাকে বলতে পারেন যে do one thing, muzzle the dog. Dogকে একটা muzzle পরিয়ে দেন রাত্রিবেলা যাতে he does not bark all night long. That is a reasonable step. So that is a reasonable requirement. Just somehow, muzzle the dog and stop him from barking. But you cannot tell Mr. X to kill his dog, or you cannot tell him to, take his dog away or give it away because it's disturbing the life of everyone. You cannot do that. So you have to ask him to do something reasonable. It has to be within his power. The requirement যে কাজটা আপনি করতে বলছেন, এই কাজটা যাতে তাদের মানে মিস্টার এক্স এর মানে আয়ত্তের মধ্যে থাকে, so that it has to be something that he would be able to do. So he has to be, the requirements has to be reasonable, and the requirements will be such, requirements গুলো এমন হবে যে requirement, by performing the requirement, the detrimental effect যেটা হচ্ছে সব নেইবারিং এর কাছে, এই detrimental effect prevented হয়ে যাচ্ছে, or maybe in some way reducing the detrimental effect. So for example, আপনি যদি ডগটাকে মাজল পরিয়ে দেন, the dog stops barking. Moving on. So for example, আপনি reduce করতে যাচ্ছেন detrimental effectটা, আপনি ডগটাকে simply for example reduce one detrimental effect. So let's take the example of the fire smoke. আপনি যদিও for example if you cannot stop smoke from escaping, at least create a chimney, and চিমনিটা তৈরি করে আপনার অনেক উঁচা একটা চিমনি তৈরি করেন যাতে স্মোকটা আরো উপরে রিলিজ হয়. In some way it is reducing the effect or detrimental effect of the smoke on the locality. So this is how in situations it has to be reasonable. Next, what are the contents of the notice? Notice এর মধ্যে কি থাকবে? Number 1, section 43 subsection 7 বলেছে যে in the community protection notice it must identify the conduct referred to in subsection 1. তার মানে কি, it has to say the problem, it has to identify the particular conduct that's causing the problem. So for example, আমাদের situation কি, the dog barking, you have to identify this and you have to tell Mr. X, this is what you're doing, this is what is wrong, and I need you to stop it. That's point number 1. It's the content. And point number 2 is explain the effect of section 46 to 51. We will talk about the effects of section 46 to 51 in just a second. But before that, moving on, the approach. So I'm sure you remember there was this note provided by Shahir sir that clearly gives you an idea of the steps that you need to take, things that you can do in order to, things that you need to do in order to solve the problems. So looking into that. Step 1, what you do is if you find a troublemaker, so for example, Mr. X, you issue a warning to Mr. X. How do you issue the warning? So to Mr. X, you first of all have an authorized person. The authorized person can be under section 53 subsection 1. First of all, it can be a constable. So for example, a constable is a policeman. It can be a policeman who feels that there are certain steps that are required to be taken in such situations. That policeman, the policeman would produce the note, will produce a warning. The warning, by the way, has to be a written warning. So for example, the policeman would first of all have a written warning prepared, and then he will go to Mr. X and knock at his door, find Mr. X, hand him the warning and tell him that Mr. X, this is a warning for you to stop the particular problems that you're creating. Gallo. It could be someone from the relevant local authority. So for example, someone, for example, Dhaka city te hote pare, for example, apne area in charge je ache, for example, maybe an in charge of Dhanmondi area can issue a warning to me for playing music all night. It could be a policeman, or it could be a person designated by the relevant local authority for the purposes of this section. So for example, the local authority decides that Mr. Y will look after all of Dhanmondi, or maybe the area in which Mr. X lives. So if all the local people complain to Mr. Y is under an authority or has the power to issue a warning to Mr. X and tell him to stop. So first of all, step 1, you have to issue a warning. Step 2, sorry, there's a bit more to step 1. So it's section 44 subsection 5 says, so for example, any of the authorized person can issue a community protection notice to an individual or body. It has to be given in written. You can see here, subsection 44 subsection 5 sub A. It has to be given in written warning that a notice will be issued if you do not stop the problematic act. And point B, A is satisfied that despite B having had enough time to deal with the matter. So A has to, then Mr. A, before giving the warning, he himself has to be satisfied that Mr. X tar kache enough time and opportunity chilo, and he had enough time and opportunity to deal with the matter and actually stop the matter before the warning was given. So for example, Mr. X is having a party at his house for 7 days straight, all night long. It should be at a reasonable manusher mathay to ashbe je definitely whatever I am doing is creating trouble to someone else. And I think I have had enough time to stop the party at one point. I should not have extended for 7 days. So before that, A, the authorized person, has to be satisfied that the person to which the warning is being issued had enough time to deal with the problem, but he did not deal with the problem. Hence, I'm giving him a warning. Our section 44 subsection 6 bole, simple. Amra kake warning ta dicchi? Amra warning ta dawar, jake warning ta dicchi, take warning ta dawar age, we have to inform anyone, any relevant person or any body that is appropriate. So for example, Dhanmondi elaka ekta সমস্যা হলো, এই এরিয়ার লোকাল অথরিটির মধ্যে একজন এসে একটা ওয়ার্নিং ইস্যু করবে, but maybe she feel করলো যে before I issue the warning I should let the mayor know, or maybe I should let the police officer or the police station here know. So I have to notify someone before issuing a warning. Good. Moving on. before that, I'll just check if any one of you have asked me any question here. Sorry. Okay, no questions yet. Okay, by the way, if you have entered through the first link, you have this option of asking me question. There should be a tab on the right where you click and you can type your questions to me. Anyways, going back to the slides. So who may be issued with the notice? Plain and simple. For example, Mr. X is the occupier of the building. He lives in the building. He lives in the house in which he throws his parties. So আমরা first of all occupier কে একটা issue করতে পারি warning under section 44 subsection 1. Not only that, যে লোকটা occupy করছে, if this person owns the property, or maybe he has a lease of the property, he controls the property. In those situations, this is the person whom do you issue the warning to. Moving on. So, for example, the conduct under section 44 subsection 2. For example, আমরা একটা situation দেখি যে for example একটা nuisance বা যে problemটা create হচ্ছে, maybe it is being created by a government body, or maybe it's being created by a government institution. So for example, আপনাদের এলাকাতে maybe there is a thing called, for example, maybe there's an armor, yeah, there's an armory. So the government is creating a lot of weaponaries right beside your house, and as a result of which gunpowder release হচ্ছে, loud explosions হয়, তারা আবার গানটাকে টেস্ট করে, শুটিং করে. So it is completely under the control of the government. So what do you do there? Who do you give the warning to? In those situations, you give the warning to a minister, right here, minister who is in charge of the department. You tell him that, Mr. Minister, I'm issuing you a warning that these are the problems. Please try to find a solution to them. Okay, simple. One very important thing under section 44 subsection 3 has to be noted that the conduct of the person. So for example, the particular problem যেটা হচ্ছে, যে কন্ডাক্টটা হচ্ছে, আপনারা দেখছেন যে একটা জায়গায়, for example, there's dogs barking in the street. একটা hypothetical situation, for example, ধরে নেন মিস্টার এক্স এর কোনো ডগ নেই, বাট মিস্টার এক্স এর বাসার সামনে প্রত্যেকদিন রাতে এসে অনেকগুলা স্ট্রে ডগ এসে সারা রাত চিল্লাচিল্লি করে, সারা রাত বার্ক করে. So these are stray dogs, they are not under anyone's ownership. Mr. কিন্তু for some magical reason প্রত্যেকদিন রাতে মিস্টার এক্স এর বাসার সামনে এসে তারা বার্ক করে. আপনি যদি এখন মিস্টার এক্স কে ওয়ার্নিং ইস্যু করতে চান, এটা বলে যে মিস্টার এক্স stop the dogs from barking, you cannot do that, because you cannot expect Mr. X to control what happens with stray dogs, as the dogs are not under his control. So that is not within his power to do so. So Mr. X সেটা করতে পারছেন না. However, for example, ধরে নেন মিস্টার এক্স কি করে প্রত্যেকদিন রাতে বারবিকিউ পার্টি করে, যেটা স্মোক এন্ড স্মেল বের হয়ে হচ্ছে অন্যান্য সব সবার বাসায় গিয়ে তাদেরকে ডিস্টার্ব করে. আবার সেই বারবিকিউ পার্টির পরে সেই লেফট ওভার ফুডটা তার বাসার সামনে ফেলে রাখে, আর বাসার সামনে ফেলে রাখার জন্য এই কুকুরগুলো এসে ওই বাসার সামনে ওই গার্বেজটা খায়, ওই লেফট ওভার গুলো খায়, আর তারা ওইখানে বসে সারা রাত চিল্লাচিল্লি করে. They bark all night long. So in this situation, Mr. X can actually take an active step to prevent it. For example, Mr. X he can stop from, plain and simple, throwing the trash in front of his house. সে ময়লাটা অন্য জায়গায় প্রপারলি ডিসপোজ করলেই পারে, কিন্তু সে সেটা করছে না। So in this situation, in situation 2, Mr. X does have a control over the situation, and we can reasonably expect him to control the situation. Hence, Mr. X can be issued a warning. Good, so that's section 44 subsection 3. Next situation. If the occupier is unascertainable, so you cannot find who the occupier is. So for example, যে আমাদের authorized personটা আমাদের, for example, আমাদের situation ধরে নিলাম police officer, সে reasonable inquiry করলো to find the proper name and address of the person who owns the property. Or after looking, he cannot find anyone with money. He cannot find anyone. So if he's looking for someone, money, if he's looking for the occupier of the property and he cannot find him, the authorized person, if he cannot find the owner, what he can do is maybe post the community protection notice on the premises. So for example, একটা খুবই সিম্পল একটা এক্সাম্পল দিই, ধরেন একটা dilapidated হাউস আছে, একটা রান ডাউন হাউসটার মধ্যে যেটা আপনি ফেলে রেখেছেন, আপনার একটা প্রপার্টি আছে, ধরেন আপনি থাকেন ধানমন্ডিতে, কিন্তু আপনার মিরপুরে একটা প্রপার্টি আছে, আপনি ফেলে রাখলেন, no one goes there, no one lives there, it is old and moldy and it's supposed to break down at any time, কিন্তু আপনি বাসাটা ফেলে রাখলেন, এখন কি হলো, vagabonds বা ধরেন poor people start to come in, squatters start to come in and enter the house. তারা এসে বাসায় ঢুকে বসে আছে, তারা বাসায় বসে সারা রাত পার্টি করে, গান বাজনা করে, এলাকার মানুষ ডিস্টার্ব হয়, তারা কাগজ পুরায়, গরম থাকার জন্য ধোঁয়াটা বের হয়ে এলাকার মানুষের সমস্যা হচ্ছে। তো সিচুয়েশনটা এমন যে আপনি এখানে থাকেন না, জমিটা পড়ে আছে, ইটস ইয়োর প্রপার্টি। সো ফার্স্ট অফ অল, the authorized person will try to find you, as it is your duty to prevent any such things from happening in your property. So it might be expected যে আপনি একটা ফেন্সিং করে দেন, সিকিউরিটি লকস বসান, যাতে এইসব না ঘটতে পারে, এই ঝামেলাগুলো যদি না হয়। তো পুলিশ অফিসারটা will look for you, he will send a notice looking for you. If he does not find you after taking all reasonable steps, সে আপনার ওয়ার্নিংটা নিবে বা নোটিশটা নিবে, either one নিয়ে he will post it on the premises. So for example, আপনার বিল্ডিংটার মেইন এন্ট্রির উপরে লাগিয়ে দিবে, এন্ট্রান্স ওয়েতে লাগিয়ে দিবে। That's a step the authorized person can take if he cannot find you. Or maybe ধরেন আপনার ঘরের বাইরে এসে আপনাকে খুঁজছে, আপনাকে নক করছে, আপনাকে খুঁজে পাচ্ছে না, তারা কি করতে পারে, they might enter the building to any extent that it is reasonable. So for example, আপনি মিস্টার এক্স এর সিচুয়েশনে চলে আসি, মিস্টার এক্স বাসার পিছনে বারবিকিউ পার্টি করছে, পুলিশ অফিসার সামনের মেইন গেটে এসে নক করছে, পাচ্ছে না মিস্টার এক্স কে। তো it is reasonable যে the police officer would just walk around the house and go to the back entrance or go to the backyard to see if they can find someone there. So they are allowed to enter the property to an extent as long as it is reasonable to do so. Good. Step 1, issue a warning, done. Step 2, this happens after you have issued a warning, but the miscreant, Mr. X, has not taken sufficient steps to remedy the problem. So the problem still persists. এখানে কি করবে? You go ahead and issue a notice. মনে রাখবেন, ওয়ার্নিং এর মধ্যে লেখা থাকে যে I will issue a notice to you if you, in the warning it is said that I will issue a notice to you if you do not stop the problems. So he did not stop the problems, the notice is issued. So must explain what must be done to stop the affecting community's quality of life. So in the notice, আমাকে আবার clearly বলে দিতে হবে যে this is the thing that you must do, that you should prevent, so that the problem does not continue. এইখানে আপনার একটা মজার বিষয়, এখানে খুব ইম্পর্টেন্ট একটা ইস্যু যেটা আপনাকে দেখতে হবে যে ফার্স্ট অফ অল আপনার এই নোটিসে and also in the warning you have to clearly state a few things. or a few steps that Mr. X can take. So for example, Mr. X, no, for example, in the notice, you have to clearly specify the effects of section 46 to 51. আপনাদের, I'm sure all of you have your acts with you. আপনি যদি আপনার অ্যাক্টটা দেখেন, আমি ক্লিয়ারলি জাস্ট একটু কুইকলি বলে যাই। স্টেপ 3 হচ্ছে সেকশন 43। এটা হচ্ছে, first of all, after issuing the notice, the person has a right to appeal against the notice that we will discuss in detail একটু পর। So for example, if you feel that you have not done the problem, you can appeal against it. In the notice, it must also be said clearly that in order to stop the problem, the relevant local authority can take actions under this section in regards to the premises. So for example, the local authority may feel যে ধর Mr. X, আমরা ওই এক্সাম্পলে চলে যাই যেখানে বাসার সামনে ময়লা ফেলে রাখে কুকুর আসে, Mr. X কে ওয়ার্ন করার পর Mr. X is not taking steps to solve this problem. So local authority এসে, the local authority might decide যে আচ্ছা, what I will do is the local authority will clean up the mess from the front of your house and clean up the garbage. They can do that. They themselves can take a step. And this implication has to be clearly specified in the notice under section 47. We'll also go into the detail of all of those in the next large seminar that we will have. However, Mr. X, the local authority can take such a step. And these things have to be clearly set out in the notice as well as in the written warning. Under section 48, it should also be made clear in the notice that if you fail to take steps, it will be an offense. And if you do not take the requisite step, what are the punishments that you may receive? So for example, you have to tell Mr. X, you might be imposed with a level 4 fine on a standard scale, number 1. So level 4 fine in the UK is about 2,500 pounds or something along that line. For example, একটা সিচুয়েশনে ধরেন, for example, local authority এসে একটা প্রবলেম সলিউশন করে দিল। So for example, local authority কে একজন পাঠিয়ে তারা ময়লাটা ক্লিন করে দিল। So the local authority, they can simply decide, I will bill you for what I have done. So that can also happen. Another thing, the notice must also specify that the fine cannot exceed or exceed 20,000 pounds if it's in case of a body. ঠিক আছে? So level 4 standard fine applies for a person. So level 4 is about 2,500 pounds. And in case if it's an action against a body, or maybe an organization, or maybe against the government, the fine cannot exceed 20,000 pounds. Furthermore, moving on, so I'll speed up the pace here. Under section 49, remedial orders can be passed by the courts. So for example, the court may pass whatever order that is necessary in order to find a solution to the problem. So you must warn Mr. X in the notice that Mr. X, be careful that the court have the power to issue a remedial order, and the order is at their whim, and they can do whatever they feel necessary in order to find a solution to the problem. Under section 50, it is provided that, for example, the court may require, or maybe anyone may require, the court may require for you to forfeit the particular object that is creating the problem. So for example, in our situation, আমরা বলেছিলাম যে in the warning you tell him to take reasonable steps, but in the notice, once you've issued the notice, and if Mr. X fails to do what is required of him from the notice, he may be asked to forfeit the item that creates the problem. So I'm sure all of you know that dogs are not human beings and they are actually a property. So in our situation, the court might tell Mr. X, "Na, your dog barks all night long. You have not put a muzzle on him. So what I will require now is I will have the dog taken away from you in order to stop the problem." This is a step that can be taken by the courts. Or maybe, so that is a seizure of the thing, or maybe forfeit of the item. So the court can tell you, give up or stop from doing such things. So these are the steps that has to be clearly, these are the implications that has to be clearly explained in the notice that you have issued. So that is step 2. A huge explanation, yet a very small slide. Anyways, so step 3 right now. So once a notice has been issued, you have a right of appeal. Mr. X can appeal against the notice. That is under section 46. So under section 46 subsection 1, firstly you have to see যে আমাদের যে authorized person আছেন, just a sec. Yes, so the person that is issued with the warning, he can actually appeal against the notice in the magistrate's court. So if you look here, you see it's under subsection 1 of section 46. It says that in the magistrate's court you can actually appeal against the notice on certain grounds. Grounds গুলা কি? Number 1 ground, আপনাকে যেভাবে মানে যে স্পেসিফিক কন্ডাক্টটা করতে বলেছে in the community protection notice. So for example, বলেছে যে আপনি সারা রাত loud music play করেন. This is the conduct that was specified in the notice. আপনি বলতে পারেন যে না, your honor, you go to the magistrate's court and you say যে না, learned judge, this did not happen. So in the magistrate's court you address judges as sir or ma'am. So for example, in the magistrate courts, if you have a lady judge, so you call ma'am, the ground that I wish to impose here today is that this particular act did not take place. So you have to show proof how, you have to show proof you did not play loud music all night long, or maybe your dog does not bark all night long. You have to show, or maybe you can show that the act does not have a detrimental effect. So for example, আপনি বলতে পারেন যে এই যে particular act আছে, এটা is not affecting anyone. Maybe your dog barks all night long, but your dog is locked up in your basement and the sound does not escape. So it could be that the sound is not escaping, it's not harming anyone, so it's not having a detrimental effect. You have to prove it. Whatever you state, you have to prove it yourself. For example, you can also say it's not a continuous thing. So you had a party at your place one day, one Friday night at your place, and they cannot issue a community protection notice against you just because you had a party in one night, because it's not a continuing thing. Or maybe you did not do anything unreasonable, or the problem is such that you cannot do anything about it. So for example, here in point E, the situation is যে আপনার বাসার সামনে কুকুর বসে থাকেন, এটা তো আপনার দোষ না যে আপনার বাসার সামনে কুকুর এসে বসে থাকে. So these are the things that this is the first ground under which you can appeal. Secondly, the requirement that is imposed on you by the notice, or maybe the time in which they have asked you to fulfill the act is unreasonable. So for example, আপনাদেরকে বললো যে আপনার বাসা থেকে স্মোক স্কেপ করতেছে, তাই আপনি 500 ফিট উঁচা একটা চিমনি বানিয়ে একদম ক্লাউডস এর কাছে গিয়ে স্মোকটা ছাড়বেন, যাতে এই এলাকার কি এই দেশের কারো কাছে যাতে এই স্মোকটা না পৌঁছায়. So you see, that is very unreasonable. You cannot ask a person to create a 500 to 600 feet chimney just to prevent barbecue smokes from going to the neighbors. That is an unreasonable requirement. You cannot impose such. So a ground apni appeal korte paren je na judge, they've asked me to do something very unreasonable, that is not cost effective, I cannot do it, that's not within my power, I will not do it. That you can appeal against it. Or maybe for example, খুব unreasonable একটা রিকোয়ারমেন্ট এটা হলো, বা বললো যে আপনাকে 2 দিনের আপনাকে আজকের মধ্যে একটা চিমনি বানাতে হবে যাতে স্মোক আর রিলিজ না হয় আপনার বাসা থেকে. So that is also an unreasonable requirement as well, because the time is too far, the time is too short for you to act. So these are the steps under which you can appeal. Furthermore, maybe there's a material defect, point 3, there's a material defect or error in connection to the notice. So for example, this ground of appeal could be used if, for example, there was a failure to comply with a requirement in the act. So for example, আপনি ধরেন যে একটা requirement of the act is আপনাকে নোটিশটা দেওয়ার আগে আপনাকে একটা ওয়ার্নিং দিতে হবে, বাট আমরা দেখলাম যে কি না, you were not never given a warning, you were directly given the notice. So you have, there is a material defect or error in connection with the notice, that you should have been given a warning first and then the notice, but that did not take place, and hence you can appeal. Lastly, the notice was issued in the wrong person. So you see, আমাদের যে first slide ছিল, so here Mr. A lives, he is being affected. Mr. E issues a notice. He intended to issue the notice to Mr. X, but by mistake it goes to Mr. A. So Mr. A can clearly say, Jana, I'm sorry, Your Honor, I'm not the person who was causing the nuisance, but someone else. So that's another ground under which you can appeal. Moving on to the next slide. The appeal must be made within 21 days from the day on which the notice was issued. So আমাকে যদি আজকে ফেব্রুয়ারি 2 তারিখ, আজকে আমাকে নোটিসটা ইস্যু করা হলো, the duty is upon me যে আমি 21 days, within 21 days from today I will take the step. So it should be 20, should be the 20, so if you have 20, yeah, so within the 24th of this month, right? I'm sure within the 24th of this month I have to take steps and appeal against this problem 21 days after the notice has been issued. So for example, if the notice was issued on the 1st of February, I must appeal against the notice within the 21st of February. And if I don't, then the appeal will not be entertained by the judges. So I've got the procedural issues in subsection 3 here. So once you have appealed against the notice, what you must do is যে রিকোয়ারমেন্টটা ইম্পোজ করা হয়েছে, for example আপনাকে বলা হলো আপনার dog barks all night long, stop your dog from barking, and now you tell them যে, for example, so now the requirement is that you have to do something. The requirement is, for example, you have to build a long chimney, barbecue flames, build a chimney. So the requirement is for you to stop the escape of smoke from your property. As per the requirement, maybe it is that you're appealing against the problem on the grounds যে আমাকে warning দেওয়া হয়নি, কিন্তু তার মানে এই না যে you will continue barbecuing all night and all day long and the smoke will start to fill up the nearby area. You have to stop the smoke from escaping your property as long as the appeal is underway. The appeal যতদিন চলছে, you have to stop this problem from persisting. However, অন্যান্য কোনো রিকোয়ারমেন্ট যদি থাকে, আপনার স্পেসিফিক অ্যাক্টটা বাদে স্পেসিফাইড অ্যাক্টটা আর স্পেসিফাইড যে রিকোয়ারমেন্টটা চাচ্ছে তারা, এইগুলো এটা বাদে যদি অন্য কিছু আপনার কাছে চেয়ে থাকে, সেগুলো আপনাকে করতে হবে না, বাট ইউ হ্যাভ টু প্রিভেন্ট দি প্রবলেম ফ্রম হ্যাপেনিং while the appeal is underway, while it is in progress. So on that ground, what the magistrates court can do is, they can, after they've heard the appeal, they have a few simple steps. Number one, they can quash the notice. They can say that Jana, for example, in this situation, কোনো warning দেওয়া হয়নি, hence the notice is not valid, I am quashing the notice. So the notice is removed, it's gone. You can modify the notice. So for example, the judge can say, Jana, you cannot be expected to build a 500-meter long chimney, or maybe you cannot be expected to build a chimney within 1 day. So I am modifying the notice to say, for example, you make a 100-meter long chimney, or maybe you make a chimney within 4 days or 10 days, so that the person has enough time to act. So the judges can modify the notice. And lastly, the judge can dismiss the appeal. He can say, Jana, your appeal does not have any ground or any standing. I do not accept it, I dismiss the appeal, then the note is still in effect. Okay? So thank you. That summarizes our very simple structure of the whole situation. Under part C, a simple summary. আপনাকে first of all একটা situation আসবে. There's a problem being created by a person. Firstly, you have to issue a warning. The warning has to be issued by an authorized person. Yes. So first of all, you have to issue a warning. The warning is issued by an authorized person. If the person has given a warning and a specific time has been set, যে আপনি এত দিনের মধ্যে প্রবলেমটা সলভ করেন, সে প্রবলেমটা সলভ করলো না, you issue a notice. After the notice is issued, in the notice you clearly give him the particular act. You tell him that this is your conduct, this is the problem, these are the steps we expect you to take, or we expect you to remove the problem and find a solution to the problems. You find the solution to the problem, and once the solution has been made or the steps have been taken, that's good. If it is not, then if he fails to do what was required of him from the notice, it will amount to an offense. The effect of the offense has to be clearly specified in the notice. So for example, you can tell him you will be fined if you fail to do what's asked of you in the notice. It is a criminal offense, you can be fined. The local authority can take steps against you. The judge can ask you to forfeit the item that is creating the problem. The court can seize the item that's creating the problem, etc., etc. You explain them in the notice. You give them the notice. He has the notice. He does what is needed. If he doesn't, he commits an offense. He has the right to appeal against that notice. Once appealed, magistrate's court will hear it on certain grounds. If it's satisfied, the court may quash it or modify it. If they are not satisfied, they will dismiss the appeal. And here, and with that, I would like to conclude our today's session. So for all of you who are watching, you have the option of revisiting this lecture at any point. This will remain as a video online and is saved on my YouTube channel. So if you feel that you want to go back and hear anything, if you feel that you want to be reiterated on a few points, you can always watch the video. Thank you. Goodbye.